Okay, why don't we get started? Thanks everybody for coming tonight. I hope you enjoy the evening. This is an event dedicated to predicting and trying to figure out what are going to be the investment trends and the various ways that the investment trends are going to go in the coming year. So we are here today to talk about where things are going to be. I think it's a good time here, despite the cold weather, first part of January, to talk about these kinds of things. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Brad Martin. I'm the Director of Commercialization Programs for a unit of the medical school called Fast Forward Medical Innovation. And as part of my role at Fast Forward, I have the privilege of overseeing the new statewide MTRAC program and interacting with the a world-class oversight committee that oversees that program. And so many of you may know that we have an oversight committee meeting tomorrow for MTRAC. And so I was able to talk three of our panelists who happen to be in town for that meeting, come in a little bit early, brave the weather, and talk to us about where they see investment trends going in the coming year. These happen to be VCs that are from the coast, from the far-flung corners of the country, so they probably have a very different perspective than our own VCs here. So we asked them to come in a little bit early to talk to us about where they see the market going in the coming year and what that means for people like yourselves who are trying to find some funding for your companies here in town. Okay, but before I get to the panels, I do want to introduce our MC for the evening, which is Tom Shehab. Many of you may also know Tom Shehab. He is a longtime local physician here in Ann Arbor, a GI physician. He was also the chief of staff at St. Joe's before joining Arboretum Ventures in 2014. Since that time, when he joined Arboretum, he's been a very active participant in the local bioeconomy here in Ann Arbor. He's been a good friend to Fast Forward over the years. And I also happen to know that Tom has a hard time saying no. So therefore, when I needed an MC for this event, I was able to reach out to Tom. I knew he'd be willing to do it. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Tom. Tom's going to be our MC for the night. He'll introduce you to our panelists, and we'll have a very dynamic interaction. Again, with some Q&A at the end for questions you may have as well. So let's welcome Tom Shehab. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Brad. I only did this because Connie, I knew, wanted me to do it. So if Connie Ching asks, I say yes. If Brad had asked, I probably would have said no, but Kevin Ward's compelling also. So that's the real reason that I did this. So first, panelists, come and sit, and then we'll do introductions that way. I think it'll be more formal. I'm excited to do this as a member of the community, and I actually sit on the board of Spark and also on the Michigan Venture Capital Board, in addition to being a managing director at Arboretum. And it's great to have the folks who are here with us today. I think this is going to be terrific, and I think the best panels are when somebody like me just throws the questions out and these three folks give you their opinions. I'm going to challenge them in a couple of ways as we talk about where we think investments may be going. But before I do that, I think what I'd like to do is have our panelists each introduce themselves, who they work for, what they do, and an interesting fact about themselves, which I'm dropping on them now. And then we'll jump into some questions. So please, James.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. So I'm a Michigan native, or at least spent 5 years here in Ann Arbor doing my undergrad. My family was all raised and born. I think up to 9 members of my family and 4 generations have graduated from this fine university. So it's great to be back even on a cool and snowy day. I currently reside in Austin, Texas, and it was 80 degrees when I left. So I'm going to go back there too. So as much as I love Ann Arbor. So I'm a venture capitalist. I focus predominantly in the medical device area and some IT space. Many people ask, how do you end up in venture? And you usually stumble into it. I think Tom may agree with that. There's no front door into venture. There's plenty of back doors out. But I did an undergraduate degree here in the mechanical engineering department and did a sort of makeshift bioengineering degree. It predates the bioengineering program here. And then went to Harvard MIT for a research program and medical school. And did that for 5 years, and then did a residency in emergency medicine at Mass General in the Brigham. Was on academic faculty with the military. The military had paid my way through Michigan. And so in 2004, I moved to San Antonio to be academic faculty. I ran the department, was the chair of the department there, a large level 1 academic center in emergency medicine, did a couple tours in Iraq. And after my second tour in Iraq, my wife kindly requested I reconsider my job choices. So we moved the family to Austin, which, a little known fact, I had visited my last event that I did as a Michigan Glee Club member. I sang here for 5 years in the Glee Club. We went on a tour my last year, and we ended up in Austin. And I fell in love with the city, even though we were only there for about 24 hours. I just couldn't believe how beautiful it was in May, and how alive it was. And so it was always hung there as this great place. And so when I living in San Antonio, ended up moving north because of this experience. So it was a very interesting way of tying in Michigan. But I moved to Austin and ended up getting an MBA and began working with Sante Ventures now 7 years ago. Initially just looking at deals with them, and then quickly moved on to the investment side and left the clinical practice of medicine for full-time venture. So I currently spend a lot of time. We're a welcoming group, come on. So I spend a lot of time focused on cardiovascular devices. We do early stage investing, so a little bit about Sante, as you understand our perspective. We're an early stage venture firm. We do Series A, Series B. We'll do anywhere between 8 to 15 million into a company over its lifetime. Many of our companies are early stage with early preclinical work, maybe a little bit of first-in-man work. We do about half in biopharma, about 40% in med device, and the remainder in some IT and services. Interesting fact, I moved to Austin because of a fond memory from coming from Michigan.
So I'm Michael Henderson. I'm here representing BridgeBio. BridgeBio is a biotech investment company, and I'll tell you kind of how I got to BridgeBio in a similar way as you did. So I did not kind of get into venture by design. I went to Stanford for medical school, decided that I was going to be a dermatologist, co-founded a company, as everyone at Stanford apparently does. Then, and then the smartest thing I did while doing that was we brought on actually an experience management team and handed it over to them. They ran with it. And then this company called BridgeBio that had just gotten founded ended up funding that company. I was like, great, that part of my life is done. I'm going to go do residency. But then I didn't. And I went to McKinsey, did management consulting for a few years. Really enjoyed kind of thinking about how larger companies think about, especially business development and going after acquiring new technologies and where growth will be. But I miss kind of being closer to the science and being closer to the entrepreneurialism that Stanford had really instilled in me. And then BridgeBio came back and said, we funded you guys. We'd like to fund a lot of other companies like you. And we were a relatively difficult company to fund at the time because we were a single sort of therapeutic agent. We weren't a platform approach to disease. We were a very risky single shot on goal, which for most venture firms meant that no one would touch us. But we had very clear science because we were targeting the hedgehog pathway at its source, and we had kind of the world-class scientific and clinical team to push it forward. So BridgeBio is kind of the conceptualization of a lot of these single shots on goal. So we work closely with a lot of academics. We'll often in-license compounds from different universities, and then we'll set up the companies as well. So we've done everything from kind of here's an in-license, we'll put together the entire team, we'll run it virtually from being just a random finding of a novel target in the lab all the way through phase 2 clinical trials, and then we'll partner it to a more traditional Series A, B investment if there's already a team in place. So we've been around for about 2 years now, have done about 10 deals, and we're always looking for new things. Our only niche is that we focus on normally kind of rare diseases, so genetic diseases. That we do have a number of things in precision oncology, though, as well. An interesting fact is I was on Family Feud. Yeah. It was a college tournament, and we made it to the finals. Then we lost to Ohio State. Yeah.
You just lost him at that.
It pained me to say.
Yeah, look, he went to Oklahoma, which is the winning team that wears red and white, unlike the Buckeyes. Donna.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Donna C, and I'm from a firm called Allied Minds, which is headquartered in Boston. I am a New Yorker, not by birth, so that makes me a fake New Yorker, according to my New York friends. But according to Bostonians, I'm definitely not a Bostonian. I'm a New Yorker. So my background, I started out actually in economics. I worked at the World Bank, and I transitioned completely from doing economics into biology and healthcare. And like my other co-panelists, every job I've ever had has been an accidental job, literally, that I've gotten through networking, kind of followed my own path, so had a pretty unconventional career. Before I joined Allied Mines, I was at Columbia University for about 11 years, and I joke that I did every job in the tech transfer office except export control. But I also did Tom's job at Columbia. I was the Coulter Program Director there, helped found the program with the Coulter Foundation, and still going on. That's a MedTech Development Fund, very similar to the programs that you have here. I joined Allied Mines 2 years ago. Allied Mines is it's actually not a VC fund, and a lot of folks kind of classify us as a venture capital group, but we're actually essentially a seed investor that happens to be traded on the London Stock Exchange. So we operate more like an operating company than a classic LP-driven, time-limited venture fund. And so that allows us to take very, I think, riskier bets and long-term plays. So by charter, we exclusively source from universities, and we are co-founders, meaning that we typically invest as the lead seed, which means that we like and have to be actually, by charter, the first money into a company. So typically when we're looking at opportunities in places like Michigan, which is, powerhouse across the board in both life sciences as physical sciences, we're basically forming and founding the company alongside the inventors, the PIs, and students or postdocs that are part of that team. So I think that makes for a pretty unusual model for the most part. Not to say that there aren't dozens of seed investors. We've been around for 10 years. And we've raised over $500 million, mostly from institutional investors in the UK. Although that base is expanding as well internationally. That's one of the trends we can talk about also, is where's the money ultimately coming from. What else can I say about myself? I don't have I can't beat the Family Feud thing, but I do have a Michigan connection. I was at Michigan way back in the dark ages, and it's actually over 15 years ago. I spent a semester at Michigan. I was a poor student then. I was doing a dual degree at the Rackham in the School of Public Health, and I only had a bicycle. And when December hit and I only had my bicycle, I was like, okay, I got to get out of here. Anyway, I did do my time at the University of Michigan, but Brad has gotten me to come back only in January. Brad, I don't know why I'd only do this for him, but happy to be back here. Little known fact about myself, one of my favorite hobbies is wire bonding in the clean room, because I just like to do something that I can get my hands on and do it and get it done, and it's finished. I don't ever have to think about it again, which is very rare in our business.
Terrific. So I think everybody realizes, pretty unique panel, terrific access to folks who are on the front end of technology being moved to commercialization and then being commercialized. And there's a ton to cover in a short period of time. But before I do, I want to do a couple of just quick yes and no questions. So think about it. Today's the day that, lots of talk about repealing parts of Obamacare. Healthcare is changing in a tremendous way. We all invest in the healthcare space. And so I guess my first question to all of you guys, single word answer, yes or no. Will the next 5 years be, actually not yes or no, better, worse, or the same for you folks than it was than the previous 5 years in terms of the headwinds or the tailwinds?
Better.
Better.
I'm with better. Glass is always half full.
Okay. So first of all, one of the reasons you stumble into venture capital is you remain an optimist at all points. So first of all, if anyone here said it was not going to be the case, then they would be taking the back door out of venture. I think this microphone may be the thing.
Yeah.
Actually, I probably don't need one. Can you guys hear me back there?
Oh, yeah.
Here, we're going to give it a time because they put you on the video. So let's give this one a whirl. Give that a try, and then we'll see.
Okay. So that was the first question. So it sounds like people feel like this is a good time to be investing. Second question, just to set it up, is two big challenges for all the companies we're going to talk about tonight and all the technologies: regulatory and reimbursement. Which is bigger?
Yeah, reimbursement.
The money, reimbursement.
Okay. So if you came to Spark 10 years ago, talked about med device, the big risk was regulatory. What's the FDA going to do? How do I get through? What's my approval pathway? I'll figure out a way to get it paid for. That's important. I only say that because those of you who are thinking about starting companies and otherwise, you've got to think about things in a different way than you have before. That being said, what I think, given the fact that the investors here invest in different stages, they invest in both biotech, devices, and otherwise. Let me just ask James to start with, given that you guys do things on the device side, what do you think is the biggest trend that's going to happen over the next couple of years in healthcare that will affect your investing?
I think that the challenge that the device world faces is that no matter what happens with the ACA, the cost curve is going in the wrong direction, and that hospitals are going to continue the trend of ratcheting down the control, increasing the ratchet of control on supplies. It's the first thing to go, right? If you're a hospital administrator, you got to decide where you're going to cut costs. You can either try to take on the nursing union. You can try to take on the physicians and say you need to cut salaries there. You can try to improve your efficiency of your organization by, cutting down employees. Yeah, those are really hard areas. Or you can go after your suppliers, and you can say, listen, I know I'm buying pacemakers from you. I'm buying knees from you. First of all, I'm going to make a preferred vendor, and now I want preferred pricing. That's the easiest way to do it, and that's the biggest impact that's hitting med device in my view. You're seeing Cardinal, for example, who has been selling bandages. They're multi-billion dollars in revenue, but they operate on a 4 or 5% margin. Okay, traditional med tech operates on a gross margin of about 75%, meaning it costs me, I make about 75 cents every dollar I sell. I got to put that into my sales and marketing. Whereas if you think about Walmart or your grocery store, that's on a very, very slim 3-4% margin. As healthcare devices move in that direction, that extra capital that they've had there to be able to spend, that slush, I'm putting in quotes slush because it's really not, but that has allowed them to buy expensive things, right? That's the pricing pressure that's been up there. It's allowed them to go early and buy technology and take risks because they've had extra cash. That's going away, and that's changing dramatically. And I think that is by far the greatest impact that's going to happen. And I think it's there's areas that it's probably pretty good, right? We want to bring down some of the costs. But the problem is med device, if you take in the entire medical device industry, it's only a couple percentage points of the entire healthcare industry. So you can squeeze it, but it's sort of getting water from a rock. You can go for a little bit, but you're not going to be able to get all of what you need there. But it's the easiest place to go, and I think we're just starting to see that impact. And so as you're thinking about what you're going to do as an innovator and what are we going to invest in, we've got to really feel a real strong belief that the technology you're bringing really offers a fundamentally different therapy, that it is really revolutionary, that it's going to be able to get paid for, that it will be adopted, and be able to fight the trends. We think that we still have very strong conviction that exists out there, but there is not room for just yet another smaller incremental improvement on a device that there had been in the past.
Great, James. Thank you. Michael.
Yeah, so I think similar to kind of incremental improvements on devices, what you're seeing now in pharma as well as incremental improvements just won't get reimbursed, right? So the FDA might approve it. It might be deemed safe and non-inferior. And really, if it's safe and just has the potential to maybe help patients, the FDA is now even saying, look, just in certain cases where there's a very high unmet need, as in Duchenne muscular dystrophy and the entire kind of Sarepta debacle, we'll give you time, right? Go out and prove that it works, and we'll approve it right now. But now you're seeing insurance companies and payers in the U.S. make decisions that they never would have 5 years ago, right? You're seeing big national payers, the Uniteds, the Anthems, come out and say, look, this rare pediatric disease, we're not going to reimburse it. And that sort of proactive approach to, I think, step in where the FDA has kind of given ground and let the payers start to regulate that, you're going to see them start to do that more and more. So I think similarly, what we look for is we always look for often a first therapy approved in a disease, because then it's hard to say that this doesn't offer some benefit. But if it's a better statin, right? I don't care how good you are. If you're a PCSK9, you're still not getting reimbursed by a lot of people, and it's a pretty miraculous drug.
Great, thank you. Donna?
I think co-panelists have said much of what I would also say. In the device realm, we're basically, in addition to devices that are differentiated, that address, really unmet needs, I think the third thing is that they really have to save money. So it's really about cutting costs or reducing costs as well as, as the clinical efficacy, as well as the good stuff, basically. So it really comes down back again and again to the reimbursement and to whether or not, there's any there on the value side.
So thank you, Donna. I intentionally asked that question, I think, to set the context, which is really important. Independent of Obamacare or otherwise, as James said, there's cost pressure that if you're an innovator and you've been in academics for a long period of time, you will have colleagues who say, but these always get paid for, we don't worry about that, I just need to get it through the FDA. An incremental change is enough. I'm pretty sure this is the best thing out there. The bar is much higher, and for those of us in the investment side, I say that because as you think about it, whether it be within Coulter or FFMI and otherwise, how does this fit in the new world order of healthcare, which is really going to be who's going to pay for it, and just because someone paid for it before, are they going to? So I wanted to get that headwind out of the way and have people be aware of it, because if you watch the blockbuster sales and the blockbuster press, you get a sense that everything gets purchased for $1 billion. And it's not always the case. So I think being thoughtful about that is an important thing, as everybody in the panel just mentioned. Switching gears a little bit, I think that out of the headwind of reimbursement, I'd love to hear how each of you guys, and we'll start with Donna, interact with universities. So really, why are you guys here on a snowy night, besides free dinner and because, you got to hang out with me?
And the free beer.
But and free beer. But on a serious note, where is it that your company interacts with universities? And what's the value proposition for you and your investors of doing that?
So, I think also a little known fact about Allied Minds is that, we were formed over a decade ago, so 12 years ago, and our original kind of outreach was to Midwestern universities. And this is partly because of our founder, who was a UK investment banker, but had some success in early stage investing in ag, right? And so his connections were in the Midwest because of the ag powerhouse research institutions. And so, one of the, just a little bit of history about Allied Minds. So being from the UK has a very different model of tech transfer, of academic tech transfer, than the US does. And in fact, there are many private groups, private organizations run the tech transfer offices and also make investments directly into spin-outs that are coming out of the institutions. So it's a very, very different model. And when he started to look around, Mark Pritchard was his name, co-founder of Allied Minds, in the UK, he said, well, it's basically done here. So he came to the US really to take the UK model to the U.S., but then discovered, there were tech transfer offices in the U.S. who weren't going to have, someone come in and take over their operations. But in that discovery, in that, kind of like his own customer discovery process, really learned that there is a huge amount of untapped innovation in the U.S. And again, this is 10 years ago. I think that still holds true. And there's a huge international appetite, even in the UK with Brexit and everything else. All of our institutional investors, with one exception, are based out of the UK that believe in US innovation. And so, Allied Minds has, as I mentioned earlier, raised over $500 million really to commercialize US innovation. And the bread and butter of that is coming out of universities. We do also work with federal labs and FFRDCs, and now more with corporate labs as well. But our connection to U.S. universities is really from, basically looking at the untapped and just the landscape of what is going on in the U.S. compared to the rest of the world. So that's a little bit of history. I mean, to this day, we still source almost all of our deals from universities. You know, it's not without its own set of challenges. I think, you know, there are actually some headwinds for us actually in the university investment space, because increasingly, you know, our competition is actually with angels, you know, and others who are doing seed investments, because many of the universities have excellent programs like FFMI and Coulter, you know, variations on the theme that are basically encouraging faculty to start companies, you know, frankly, maybe a little earlier than they should be formed. And that complicates the situation for investors like us, particularly when you take on, you know, capital that might not understand what else it might take to bring the technology or the company forward. So I'm going to stop there because I know I dug
really
up a lot
helpful.
of issues. So.
No, but I think it's important for people to kind of think about this. We're going to synthesize all this as we continue to talk about, but I think that there was an important message there, which is it seems to lots of people to be very sexy to spin out a company. Timing is like location in real estate. And so I think one thing that's important in that is it's nice to be able to bring in outside capital. The question is, what's it cost you? And what are some of the barriers that happen when you leave prematurely and don't tap Coulter, FFMI, and all the other opportunities are there? Not saying I have a right answer to that, but just remember that. I'm going to try to take away 4 or 5 things for people to remember as you go home and think about the startup or the technology you're working on and where that fits. But that's something I see innovators not seeking adequate counsel. They know someone somewhere else who spun off a company and it worked well. So I just want to put it out there. Michael, your thoughts?
Yeah, so the BridgeBio model, I think, is rather similar to Allied Minds in that, right, our entire model, and we're backed by private equity and hedge funds, which, you know, they love the science, but their basic idea is generate this IRR, this return every year, and that hurdle rate for us is, you know, 30 to 40%. And the way that we've kind of modeled our portfolio is when we look historically across drug development, the probability of therapeutic success from bench to bedside is roughly 9 to 10% for all comers across all biotech. When you look at genetically defined targets, chances where you can be disease modifying, smaller populations, right? Smaller markets, not necessarily blockbuster markets, but that then doubles to 20% probability of success. So if you're a gambler, then 1 out of every 5 should work. So we need a lot to ensure that we won't lose money, and we need to make sure that there's a good asymmetry in those bets to make sure that when we get a hit, it covers the cost and generates a pretty high hurdle rate that we need to achieve to attract this new class of capital, which is hedge fund and private equities. So the best way that we can kind of find a lot of very strong early science, you know, is to go to universities, and that's also the best way that we can get asymmetrical returns, right? We can hang around Boston and hang around the Bay Area and, you know, get a $5 billion piece of a $50 million round. That's not going to move the needle for us if that company then IPOs 5 years later for a 2x, right? But if we can come in, work with the founder, give the founder a good piece, and then put in operational pieces as well and actually form a company and then help bring something very leanly through a virtual model to the clinic and to the point where we can then exit it and realize the majority of that value, then we're doing what we need to do to generate our returns.
Great. Thanks, Michael. James?
So I would say that, you know, second everything there, and we're, you know, a little bit further along, but not that much further along. We do a lot of company creation. I would say that if we look at our portfolio, you know, why Michigan or why a university like this? Well, pretty simple. MIT and Stanford have a lot of VCs crawling around, a lot of experience, and so therefore finding deals there is not easy. There's a lot of attributes of those areas that we could talk about that the rest of the country struggles with lack of talent that outside of the innovation. That's a huge issue. But from an innovation standpoint, from that, you know, that identifying a molecule to coming up with a creative physiological solution that could use a device and leverage it, that's happening at the ground level at the university. And so, you know, I just did a deal less than a year ago out of the University of Iowa. We moved the technology to Menlo to San Francisco. We've got one out of Bowling Green that we moved to Austin. It's in a rare disease category. We've got out of Toronto, washed up technology there that we've put together in another place. We got it. So we go and look for technology and bright people to be able to partner with, and we want to be around the most creative minds, and Michigan is certainly one of those places.
So that's very helpful. I'm going to be a bit provocative intentionally, which is, why move those companies? Why did you move those companies?
So every company, we face this with all the companies. Where do you build the company? And that has a lot to do with who's on the team today and who do you need to have on the team tomorrow, or next year, or 5 years from now. And let's talk about med device, because I can talk about that better than drug development. In med device, early on, usually it's an engineer or a clinician that's got an engineering background that comes up with the idea. And they can prototype it in their shop, so they can get that extrusion sent in and they can work on it. But it's not just the innovation or the IP that you've put together that's the key. I mean, early stage folks, if you want to put a pearl out there, I'm sure you've heard it before, is early stage folks, or early stage inventors or entrepreneurs put all of the weight and value of the company and technology that will be created and view it as that kernel of idea that they hit while running and file the IP on it, and if that was the company itself. While that kernel of idea or insight may be brilliant, it is the entire rest of the company that is required to actually make it successful. It is unbelievably difficult to take an idea and get it to the bedside. And so it's the regulatory folks, it's the quality system engineers. It's, do you have the right engineers who have done it before? Do you have people who are in business development that understands the market? Do you have marketers who actually understand what that end user is going to need? Do you have the clinical folks that can run the early feasibility studies? Do you have people who are used to, going into South America and doing first in man? Or how about if you're later stage and running a multinational PMA clinical trial? Those skill sets only reside in a couple spots in the United States, except for a few folks who, follow their spouse or were with a company that started there and fell out. That's Minneapolis. It used to be Boston. It really is not Boston anymore for med device, and it's San Francisco. The challenge with Minneapolis is that no one's funding there. And the challenge with San Francisco is it's unbelievably expensive. And so if you're trying to do med device in San Francisco, you're paying rates competing with Google and Facebook. And when your executive assistant, when it just costs you $110,000, $120,000 to have an assistant, that's an executive assistant, that's not even an engineering assistant, you realize the amount of capital it's going to take you to build that company there is challenging. So we actually build a lot of them. We build some in Austin. Austin's cost of capital is similar to Ann Arbor. We look for other places that we can do it, because then the costs can be a lot lower, especially early on. Right? There's always this debate early on about capital and time, and I got to race and put all this capital to it. Our view is that there's, in early stage companies, there is no good substitute for money and time. Don't spend much money, buy you all the time you need. Early companies need time. So we sometimes will start it, here in an incubator, and then when we get to that right stage, we might move it. But it's around talent.
Got it. So I think that's an important thing, is a takeaway, and I think it is a challenge for the people in this room, which is that you've got people who come here. Now, I will tell you that Donna would have never left if she didn't have a bike that was in that December. If she had had a car, Donna would still be here and not be a New Yorker or a Bostonite. She'd be an Ann Arborite, okay? Without a doubt, that would have happened. I think it's important for us to think about what's the infrastructure that you need to have so these companies don't go. I can tell you there are data that suggests that cost to bring in a company to exit is about 30% less off the coast than on the coasts. Now, the problem is the challenges of where do you find the CEOs and otherwise. So those of you who are doing their PhDs, I talked to at least somebody who was in his PhD going to go and do his postdoc, figure out a reason to stay here and figure out what you need to stay here, and we build that infrastructure as we continue to go on, because I think the key issue is not just to originate it here and license it out, but to build these clusters of places where you can do it for more cost effective for those of the folks who want to do it in the Midwest. And I think that us taking down some of those barriers are a really big, important thing. So I guess what I'd ask each of you is, Donna, have you seen a company that is off of the coast that's done well and benefited from being in a geography somewhere outside of either Boston and/or the Silicon Valley?
Well, well, in our portfolio, we have a number of companies that are basically in the cyberspace, right? And that's not, health sciences or life sciences, but all of those companies are located in the Virginia area for obvious reasons, right? And that it's all about following the talent. So, it's back to the talent issue,
Yeah.
really. So
There's a cyber security incubator in Northern Virginia, if I'm not mistaken, called Cyber 45,
right.
I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's and also just a lot of connectivity to the relevant governmental agencies that have a lot to do with setting cyber policy, et cetera. So I don't have a I guess an outlier.
Understood.
It really is about following the talent for that particular industry.
Got it. Michael, do you guys have an experience?
Yeah, so what we generally do is we'll try to keep it as close to the founding place as long as we can. And as we start to approach one of two things, either M&A or commercialization necessitating an IPO, which would then require kind of access to public markets, and then you should be closer to the money because it just makes things easier when they're from the coast. Then we try to keep it as close to the founding scientists as possible because we feel like you risk a lot by moving that away, and often the scientist won't want to leave and shouldn't leave for a lot of reasons. So there have been two outliers that we've seen, and this is very difficult to say given the Family Feud experience, but they were both in Columbus. And but this is the founding scientist. So Jerry Mendel is a world-class geneticist, and he works closely with Brian Caspar, another world-class geneticist, and two gene therapy companies, Avexis, which was recently in the news for doing an incredible work in a gene therapy that took kids who normally die after 1 year of age from having spinal muscular atrophy. And these kids are now 2-3 years old, and they're hitting all of their normal milestones. So for all intents and purposes, it's working quite well, and we'll see how long it continues to work. But incredible work, and that's there. And Milo, which is a dystrophy gene therapy company as well, is also still based there. And that's mainly due to Dr. Mendel's involvement and Dr. Kaspar's involvement, because they're the ones who designed and ran the trials, and they had the patient registry and populations there. And these, at least in the case of Avexis, is a company that's gone public, now valued well north of $1 billion. So there definitely are outliers.
Great. And next I'm going to change the question on James because I want to ask one other thing intentionally we're going to go to questions in a few minutes from the audience, and I want to do some. When you invest in a company that comes out of university that has a lead founder, could be a clinician, could be a scientist, a faculty member, could be a postdoc, should they be the CEO when the company comes out? I told you I'd be provocative.
I think it's a great question. So I'll start by saying that the skill sets of a CEO from early drug development or early engineering work through taking a company public are very different sets of skills. It is exceedingly rare that a CEO who starts a company with a Series A will take it all the way through. With that said, what we'll look at, Tom, is if the real issue that when we're coming in at a Series A level is the science, which it most of the time is, then the CEO is really a project manager, because it's really what we're doing is basic science research, right? You can't, for all intents and purposes, you're just not able to get grant money. You want to speed it up. Instead of writing grants, you've written a big grant. We write a big check. That's the grant, and it's the science that we need. And we'll have a heart-to-heart with the CEO or the founder, and we have them all the time. You're going to be in this seat. We're going to give you all the skills that you need, but don't plan on you being there, as the title of CEO. If you need the title of CEO, you're in the wrong role. Go look for somebody else's capital. On the other hand, if what you want to see is what you've created here on the bench, and you want to see it get to the bedside, and you want to be intimately involved with it, and you don't care what your title is, you just want what's best for the company, and you understand that what's best for the company will also be best for you, because your equity will be worth more. The opportunities that you'll be able to create more, and you'll be able to say, I founded the company and I took it all the way through FDA and actually started selling, and it was an M&A. If that's the attitude, then we're going to back you.
Great. Michael, your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's kind of a funny question because I got into venture because during medical school, worked with a few of my professors, founded a dermatology company, and then one of my professors was a terrible CEO, just an absolute great professor, but absolutely awful CEO, and refused to believe it. So we didn't get funding for about 2 years, and I don't blame anyone because they should not have funded us. And eventually, it took a very hands-on sort of like BridgeBio team to come in and say, look, we'll fund you, but and we'll call you president. But we're going to bring in an experienced CEO. And it was a topical derm company. And we brought in a CEO who had founded, run, and exited a topical derm company. And was also just a very nice guy. Very difficult to argue that this person was a much better CEO. He's still the CEO today. And I think that once he came on, and he and the president still clash to this day, I now go to the board meeting as a co-founder / investor and sit in between them, and we all play nice. And that tension still exists, and we see it in a lot of our companies. And I think, exactly as you said, I would love to be proven wrong and that the founding scientist should and will be the best CEO. But oftentimes, I think if you're not at least open to the possibility that someone else could come in who's done it time and time again and at least save time, Maybe they'll make wrong decisions, but at least they'll be efficient and they'll get it to patients faster. And you'll at least be open to those discussions and call yourselves whatever you'd like, and president is great. Then at least it's hard for us to get behind funding you.
Donna, your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I'll be even more provocative and just say that, a PI who wants to be CEO typically scares the bejesus out of professional investors. I mean, it just it really does. I'll just put it out there and say it. And it's for all the reasons that, that folks have already mentioned, but, ultimately, if you're talking about life sciences, you're talking about taking, on millions of dollars of somebody else's money. Yes, many PIs think, well, I've taken on millions of dollars of government money, but that's very different than private money, that has milestones and various people's careers attached to that, in a different way than than you would have in a lab situation. So I think, for Allied Minds, we typically will work very closely with the scientific, the engineering, the clinical team that invented, the concept, the device, the what have you, the therapeutic. Our investment team members actually operate as project managers, as GMs, and so we have a very close relationship with the PIs, and maybe in some cases like too close relationships where it's really like a partnership, and that when it comes down to it, I think that one of the things that we automatically look for, and I think having years of experience working with academic faculty and researchers, is that you kind of honestly the phenotype of person who's going to work well in the structure that you have. So for us, I mean, honestly, when I talk with my colleagues who are presenting opportunities to me, I say, listen, there's like two ends of the spectrum, and then there are folks in between, but there's one end of the spectrum where the PI wants to be the CEO, he or she wants to be in full control, wants to make all of the executive decisions, and that's fantastic, but it's really just not for us. Because we need partners. We don't want to be coming in just as pure money. That doesn't make any sense. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is the academic PI who's so focused on the basic science, which is terrific, but really may not have, that kind of like passion or drive to get his or her invention to market. And so we look for the PI or the research team that has a passion, I guess, more to what you were saying earlier, for, really caring about getting their thing to the market, regardless of titles, regardless of, personal wealth and et cetera. So it's really about finding that right combination. And I think that really it's very important for early stage if we're taking something out from the very beginning.
I would suggest for those in the audience who are entrepreneurially minded, that set of answers from the three people, I would really think about as you go home tonight and really, really think about that. None of it is negative, but I think one of our jobs is really to try to give a very realistic view of where the folks who develop the technology and where the company goes and where the commercialization goes and what happens along that way. I think it's very important because, again, in my years in the ecosystem here, there are certainly people who struggle with that. I actually think I'm going to ask one other question real quickly. It's going to be a single word answer as much as possible, which is something Donna intimated, which is they are getting competition from angel investors, early stage investors from what they do, but also mentioned international money. I'd love each of us to just give a source of money we see coming into early innovation that is either new or challenging. So that it could be things like Google Health. For me, I'll just tell you, we have seen a lot of health systems start to make primary investments. Large health systems, Trinity Health, Geisinger Health, make investments. That's a new thing for us. But just since we're talking about funding sources, there are different ones. James, have you seen any new entrants into the field that fund either technologies and or companies that we're talking about that are new other than traditional institutional VCs like us or more hybrid models?
So I've seen that there's clearly money coming in from on the device side from Europe, more so than the U.S., also from Asia is starting to take a look at, and there's some real creative things, especially on the biopharma side with Asia. If you're looking to partner there, we've had companies and folks that have moved to Asia and have gotten huge state grants, the local state grants there. A lot of issues to work through if you're doing that, but it's another source of capital.
Yeah, we've seen the same thing. How about you, Michael?
Yeah, actually just LPs. You've seen LPs, limited partners, who kind of traditionally fund venture capital firms. They're now going, in some cases, straight to the Series A, right? And they're doing it like Denali just got funded, big neuroscience effort, $100+ million Series A, right? Very experienced group of people doing this, but a lot of their funding and the valuation was tied to the Alaska Pension Fund, right? The Alaska Pension Fund has a lot of money due to some very good oil reserves, and they traditionally have distributed that among early stage VCs, and they've had good experience with biotech VCs. So someone there said, you know what, we could probably just do this ourselves, and they went and at least have done it once or twice.
And Donna?
Yeah, so, sovereign wealth,
Yep,
right? That's the next step,
exactly.
Right? So, so we recently raised close to $70 million US from GIC, which is the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Singapore.
Yeah.
And the reason that they invested in us is so that they can get access to direct investments in our portfolio companies. So, so they're going straight in as well.
So I think that's an important thing because I think, again, from my time in town on the academic side and then otherwise, some of the best scientists are the folks who are hustlers, right? They know where RO1s are, but they know other sources of grants and otherwise. As you commercialize companies, there are a lot of funding mechanisms out there, and there are people who hustle better than others in terms of finding those. I'd argue there's a tremendous amount of money of having, or benefit of having professional institutional investors, but there are times where that's not an option, and looking, not only exhausting what's internal, but also what's external, you're going to see more and more folks being involved. And so the next question, what I'd like to do, I think, is move to questions from the audience. We want to make this interactive, and people could listen to these folks all day, but who has a question? Dr. Mariver. I rounded with you many years ago, Sophia. I was. I stumbled in a number of good places. I did okay.
Because of the early investment. It's very interesting, the model that you described. Now this, again, I apologize if it's a stupid question, but what is the typical equity that you put in then? You have majority concern, or what is your breakup with the PIs?
Right. So I used to be kind of shy about saying this, but now I've been doing this job for 2 years, so that's over. But Allied Minds takes what's called supermajority, right? So that's more than 50%, and it's typically more than 80%. So one of the that's for some entrepreneurs, that is like quite a shock to the system because they think of, that dynamic should be flipped. But because we have our institutional investors who basically do direct investment, we are typically protecting the PIs, the founders, through the Series A. So there's some dynamics around the anti-dilution that aren't fully appreciated by, like, first, unless you're an investor, you typically don't talk about things like anti-dilution, although PIs are getting actually pretty sophisticated about that as well. So, so that is our typical scenario.
I think it's worth going down each person because I think you're going to see a wide range of that. So, Michael, how about you guys? Where do you end up typically after investing?
Yeah, so we it depends on where we come in. If it's like a Series A or a Series B, right? Our typical check size, no matter what, wherever we start, will generally be 10 to 20 million, and that should get through some sort of inflection point. So if it's a later stage company, and it could have somewhere in the range of a 10 to 20 million dollar valuation already applied to it. So 10 more in, we would have half. But if it's already worth 10 million, then other people will own it. Other angels or investors will own it. Most of the rest of that probably. If it's earlier stage and we're doing more company creation, then it really depends on the state of technology and where how much time as well going forward the founders can put into it, because often they're limited, and it depends on what they want to do. But I would say in those cases, we would end up being north of 80%.
Tom, we're going to turn it over. Chris had it.
Just for Donna, what is the typical bite size for Allied?
The typical,
Bite size,
how much money do we put in? It basically depends on what the technology is, because we invest in both life sciences and physical sciences. But on the life sciences side, therapeutics, I would say that most of our therapeutic investments are made under our joint venture with BMS, which has a very different model than the rest of our investments through Allied Minds. That's more of a licensing model, although I will say that, depending on the technology, depending on the specifics, we actually have been known to cut in investors on, I'm sorry, not investors, the founders, the scientific founders, on royalties. So which is a very different play than equity. So on the therapeutic side, for our typical investments, we will put in about $1 million just for feasibility, and really half of that money goes to reproduce the academic experiments, and that typically takes about a year, 18 months, and then we put in another typically 15 million, 1.5, for lead optimization. And that takes us to a candidate declaration that is then ready for GLP tox. So that's all before toxicology.
Hi, so this might be a good question for you to be able to brag about your companies a little bit. But I was wondering, since there are various options of investors that could co-develop a company or start a new company, what do your companies offer that is unique, different from other investors? Why shouldn't we look at something that is different? Maybe an investor from China or an investor from another region of the world, or other investors. What makes your companies uniquely valuable for partnering with the PI in the development of a company?
Yeah, so I'll start by first saying I'm not here to pitch Sante and that you should all come and try to do it. When you sit in this seat, you realize we have no shortage of people looking for capital. So let me spin it and ask from the entrepreneur side of what you're looking for. What would I look for if I'm raising capital and have the luxury of having offers, right? So let me put it, now you're in a rarefied air here. What you're looking for is a long-term partner who understands what it takes to build a company. And just as a football team is more than the quarterback, you got to have 11 on offense, 11 on defense. You got to have special teams. You got to have multiple coaches. It is no different, and that transfer from a lab where you have a single PI who can run it and do it as they want, or a clinician who's in the OR and just does it. They miss that team. Right? I'm a physician. We're not team oriented. Right? We don't training as physicians is generally not team oriented. It's zone and tribal. building a company is not tribal. That's the fastest way to destroy your value. So what you're looking for in an investor is someone who's been there, who's done it, who shares the same philosophies as you, who's going to look after your interests when it comes to anti-dilution, when it comes to what the value is. When they tell you your company's only worth, $2 million, I'm going to own 80% of it, and you realize that your partnership with that venture group is going to turn your 20% into something far greater than it would if you owned 100% of it. And that's what you're looking for in the ideal world.
Yeah, so I would say what we will provide is all the pieces that you don't have, in a sense. So we've done everything from, like, there's already an established team, and all they need is kind of capital and a little bit of board oversight. And then, but in that case, I'd say you can find a lot of other venture investors who would probably give you better terms than we would, because our model is go after smaller, less sexy things. And if you've already got a lot of other offers, then great, go with those, because their asymmetry profile will be different than what we need to see. But at least for us, I would say if you have a promising kind of dirty hit in the lab, that's where we typically come in. And then what we've proven that we can do a few times now, which we couldn't say 2 years ago, but luckily we can now, is we can get things to IND incredibly leanly. So Pelopharm, the company which I founded, we got to IND for less than $5 million. We're now in phase 2 for less than $15 million. Like, we'll get to approval for less than 35. This is for a topical, natural product. That's unheard of in the industry. That's less than a tenth of what pharma would do. And then as a founder, your 20% will be closer to 10% than it will be to 2%. And you'll have a much bigger piece of a still large pie.
One more question.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could comment a little bit about the diagnostic space, investment trends, and also what the risks and opportunities you see as investors.
So Ann Arbor had a success, right? I mean, with Accuray and Handy Lab, yep. So you've had some experiences there. Diagnostics is an area that we have looked at a lot and have continually tried to have an open mind, and we have yet to make out of our 30-plus investments, we still have yet to do anything in the space. The challenge we have with diagnostics is who's going to pay for it? Why do we need to know this information? It's cool, I'll give you that, but who's really going to use it? What clinical data is this going to drive? And particularly, what outcomes are you going to measure that really are going to change clinical practice? And if you can nail that, then I think there's tremendous opportunities, and diagnostics can be very successful. But just because you've got a new tumor marker, because you work in oncology and that's what you did, and I remember how I had one when I did my master's, and I thought it would cure cancer, right? Because that was the only thing I worked on. And of course, it had nothing to do with it, right? It was useless. But for a while, I believed in it. That's the challenge, is really understanding where does this play out in the world. So I think if you're in Ann Arbor, you probably have a few folks around here who understand diagnostics better than a lot of other places. So that's a real plus for you.
So
I was gonna hand the baton over, because we actually don't invest in diagnostics. For many reasons, including the ones that James here had outlined. It's an incredibly challenging spot right now. Yeah.
So we also do not invest in diagnostics, but I was at GE before in their healthcare group, and they do strategic investments in diagnostics. I mean, when we looked at a number of items there, and I would say that if you're in diagnostics, your best bet, honestly, is to find a strategic investor. So a company like a GE or a Roche, or some sort of partner that's looking to differentiate their offering by tacking on a diagnostic.
So Arboretum does a lot of, we could talk about molecular genetics all day long. Manish, you have lots of insight into that. I think the answer is, without getting too much of our own group, because I wanted to be the moderator, but I think that diagnostics have to show clinical utility in a way they haven't before. Because it's neat, because it's better, because it's great technology, doesn't translate into the bedside changing things. And it's not just cost, it's true clinical utility. If I choose this diagnostic over another diagnostic, what's the downstream benefit to the health system? Okay, I ran an integrated delivery network with 1,000 docs and a tremendous number of patients that went through it. And you've got to be able to argue for me that the pathologist is going to do a test where that cost saving is and how it changes management. I think in the setting of clinical utility, diagnostics in a pure diagnostics remain very interesting. That's separate from diagnostics that are lab-based diagnostics that are research tools, which is also a very interesting area. But I won't get too much, happy to take that offline. But I think the key issue is separating out where do liquid biopsies fit? Where does molecular testing fit in the wider pantheon of standard care for physicians? And who's going to do that? What's going to be done at university? What's going to be done everywhere else? I think that still remains up in the air on the world of diagnostics. Brad, do you want, I just personally, as the person who moderated, great questions. I think sometimes you get lucky to have a panel like these three folks where people could probably spend 3 hours here and ask questions and still not get all of them answered, but these folks could answer them. So it's been tremendous. But I think that the key thing is I would just suggest for the folks who are here, lots of things were spoken about today. There are headwinds. There's lots of opportunity. And the key thing is, and I think Dr. Marver asked a very good question, which was, there are no dumb questions to ask folks who are on the investment side. You've got to ask them. And you know what? Don't ever take capital without knowing what is the incremental benefit of this investor. Because things are going to get ugly, and it's like a team. When it gets bad, who do you want at your hip? And who's going to be there to be the supportive person? It's not just capital. All capital does not have the same value long term. And I think that's an important thing to discern, because easy money, like my mom would say, doesn't mean it's good money, okay? Things that seem too good to be true, you want partners in this for a long haul. And I think the other question about what do you own at the end? Owning 20% of a $1 billion company is a lot more than owning 90% of a $10 million company. And so I would just tell you, take your mindset and seek lots of counsel as you think about these things as you go forward, because it's important. So thank you guys very much for letting me do this. And Brad?
I just wanted to, it's a couple minutes after 7. I wanted to be respectful of your time. Thank you all for coming. I wanted to reiterate Tom's comments about what a fantastic panel we had. So I'd like to thank them, and also I think Tom did a fantastic job of moderating. So thank you very much. I also want to just thank our host, Ann Arbor Spark. This is not our typical event here. Normally we're on campus, but because we are now a statewide hub, we did want to not be quite so U of M centric, so have our events downtown here. So thanks again to Ann Arbor Spark and Ann as well, and the group that pulled this all together. So thank you all.